We are 1 week out from the U.S. presidential election. What do polls indicate, and what are the two candidates up to during the final full week ahead of the big day? Let's turn to VOA correspondent Jessica Stone. Welcome back.
Good to see you.
So, Jessica, in what appears to, what experts say will be one of the tightest races in U.S. history, who's leading the latest polls?
Yeah, this is a fascinating example of why national polls are reflecting one set of values and state-by-state polls in the battleground states are reflecting something else. The latest polls released on Monday in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, which are all battleground states that will decide the election, have Trump up by just 1 point, but that's within the margin of error. Now, on Sunday, we had an Arizona poll put Trump ahead by 2 points. Again, this is within the margin of error, so razor-thin margins. But two national polls released Sunday show Harris up by 1 to 4 points. And so often at VOA, when we talk about U.S. elections, we have to remember to explain that this system is not winner take all, and it is not a popular vote that will elect the U.S. president. It is the 270 electoral college votes that will elect the next U.S. president. And that means it's going to come down to what happens, who turns out, and how close the margins are in about 7 states in the United States.
Right, and you have to walk us through the two candidates' biggest selling points. I mean, what strategies are Trump and Harris really, pushing for?
Well, a recent NBC-CNBC poll shows that Trump has actually pulled ahead of Harris by just a couple of points in terms of popularity. Now, both of these candidates are really low popularity overall, which analysts say shows that people really don't like either choice entirely. But they are seeing this change from the height of right after Harris announced her candidacy, this change. On the issues, we're seeing polling data, Americans giving Harris more credit for being strong on abortion rights, climate change, and healthcare. So she is driving those points home as she goes to the battleground states. They give Trump more credit for managing the economy and immigration. But according to Gallup polling, the economy is the #1 issue for American voters.
Well, in the meantime, Trump, continues to attack Harris. And hasn't Harris also, been targeting her opponent with, jibes over his age and competence? We have to talk about that.
Absolutely. And she has called him a fascist. She has called him unhinged, unstable. And we're seeing definitely her take a more negative turn. Gone is the joy and the good vibes of the early Harris campaign. Now we really have both of these candidates accusing each other of things, calling each other names. That Trump rally in Madison Square Garden over the weekend in New York City initially started, for example, with a closing message. Kamala broke it. I'm going to fix it. Then it really got unfocused. There's been a lot of criticism here in the news cycle in the United States in the last 24 hours because there were so many popular surrogates there. There were a lot of racially charged remarks, and there's been a lot of criticism, including Republicans stepping away from some of the remarks that were made during that very long campaign event. And there were particularly some jabs at Hispanics, which is important for the political reason that Hispanics are going to be part of the electorate that's going to make those critical decisions in those critical 6 or 7 states. And that's what the Harris campaign pointed out, that she was with Puerto Ricans, for example, at the same time, or just ahead of the remarks that were made at the Trump rally. So yes, a lot of mudslinging going on in these final days. But remember, early voting is always going to be a factor here. The message may be too late for some of these voters. There are so many people early voting that they may already have cast their ballots by the time they get these closing arguments.
That's a good point. Now, in the meantime, rain is in the forecast for Election Day, with some experts saying extreme weather can disrupt the election. Is that so? How does that work?
Yeah, it really depends on where in the country. I mean, we're seeing, and again, we're 8 days out, so these forecasts may in fact not occur. But 8 days out, we're seeing rain forecasts for the middle of the country. This is a part of the country where people in the swing states of Michigan and Wisconsin in particular, they're used to rain, they're used to cold. But there is research that indicates that it could also keep people more broadly home from the polls. That research is not state specific. There's a University of Copenhagen political science professor who showed that marginal voters are the kinds of voters that would maybe choose to stay home with bad weather. And a Princeton study shows that about less than 1% or so of the voters he surveyed show that. So we're really talking about small groups of people. But the reason it's important to point out, and I'm glad you raised it, is because small groups of people may well swing this election in one direction or another.
Well, there is a verbal attacking between the two and maybe bad weather on the way. But what are some of the key points that experts say voters should be really mindful of?
I think the biggest question at this point, 8 days out, is will we have an election result on election day? And it increasingly looks unlikely that we will, right? Because all of these critical battleground states, they begin counting the ballots at different times. For example, we have states like Michigan, all of Arizona, North Carolina, Nevada, they've already started counting the vote. But in Georgia and Pennsylvania, they don't start counting until election day. So we could see this sort of ripple effect where you've got the early votes and the day of votes coming in, being counted at different times. And it's very possible that if there's an influx of early votes to count, they may not make their deadlines. They may need extensions. Remember, 4 years ago, we saw some states not have a result for 4 to 6 days. That
Right.
could certainly happen again with this influx of early votes, which I should point out is not as high as it was 4 years ago. Those were COVID-induced, steps that people took to be extra careful. We're not seeing the same rates of early voting, but we're actually seeing the opposite trend where we see more Republicans early voting. That just means we can't count on those early votes to be a predictor of the ultimate winner. We have to wait till every vote is counted. That's how close it's going to be.
We do have one more week to go. All right, Jessica, thanks so much for the report. As always, we appreciate it.
Good to be with you.